So, what is like the most ridiculous, outdated HR rule or practice you can think of that we should stop using right at this moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think one that I would say would be annual performance reviews.
Annual.
And I had an idea for creating a hashtag that we would encourage all employees to use, which now has become a common practice, but I believe this was the first culture hashtag that was created.
今回はこの netflix も取り入れているという人事のスペシャリストが登場。今まで普通だと思っていた人事に対する考えがガラリと変わります。
久彩子の世界のすごい人 Amazing people of the world。
皆さんこんにちは、久彩子です。この番組は世界の経済界に大きな影響を与えるなどビジネスで成功を収めたすごい人たちの著書を手がかりに本人へのインタビューを通してその思考と人生を深掘りしていき皆さんの運命を変える一冊に出会えるかもしれない番組です。
久さんこんにちは。番組の進行をサポートさせていただきますペンギン編集長でございます。
お願いします。あれ編集長なんだか今日立体感ありますね。
ちょっと前よりちょっと大きくなっちゃったんですけど
急成長しましたね、
はい、
まあいろいろありますけど編集長よろしくお願いします。頼りにしてますよ。
はい、今日もですね、しっかりフォローしていきたいと思います。よろしくお願いします。
ちょっとなんかアナログでホッとしますけど。
それでは改めて今回の世界のすごい人はラース・シュミットさんが登場。取り上げる書籍はネットフリックスも採用するという戦略的な人事について書かれた最強の組織は OS を書き換えるです。まずはラースさんのプロフィールを紹介。アメリカ公共放送やチケットマスターなどグローバル企業で20年以上の実績を持つモダン HR の世界的権威。アメリカ公共放送時代には革新的な採用スキームを構築し同社初のイノベーション賞を受賞。人事コンサルティングファームアンプリファイの創業者としてトップ企業の人事変革を牽引する傍ら人事ノウハウを世界に無償公開する国際組織 HR オープンソースを共同創設します。リンクドインでは世界の採用インフルエンサー50人世界トップ100インフルエンサーに選出され世界的ビジネス誌であるファストカンパニーでも連載を持たれます。理論と実践で世界の組織戦略をアップデートし続ける現代の人事戦略家です。
ねえ、もういろんな企業のいろんな人を見てきていると思いますのでいろいろ深掘りしていきましょう。Lars, thank you so much for joining our show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So let's get into the details. So what made you want to write this book and what made you want to redefine human resources?
Yeah, well, I've been writing about the field of human resources for years. I started writing for various HR blogs, and then I started writing for Forbes, and then I began writing for Fast Company. And what I wanted to do was, I think when you're writing for publications like Fast Company or Forbes, you're usually covering a specific topic. And, you're generally bound to around 1,000 words, roughly, to cover that topic for, online stories. And, there's a level of depth that you can get into and you can explore a specific topic fairly deeply. But I think after time, as I began writing more and more, I began to feel that, each individual article was a valuable kind of stepping stone to what modern HR was becoming. But I wanted to create something that kind of brought all of the ideas and the concepts together into essentially a playbook for modern HR. And so that's kind of where the idea came from. I said, okay, it's time for me. I've written enough individual pieces. It's time for me to write the collection.
Wow. So when you started like the HR blog, when was that? How many years ago was that?
So I first started blogging in probably 2000 and I would say 9?
16, 17 years ago, right?
Yeah.
What were the reactions were you getting from those blogs?
Yeah, so for the initial blogs, the way that I approached writing, especially as I started, I was a very mediocre writer. And I say that with humility. There's a lot of really talented writers in the space. I wouldn't have considered myself one of them. But the way that I focused my writing was to basically share practices of what I was doing and what I was learning from it. So it was less of a kind of lofty analyst take or perspective and more of a practitioner's perspective of somebody doing the work. This is what I did. This is what I learned from it. These are the mistakes I made. This is how I kind of synthesized those mistakes to build something better. So I think there was a flair of kind of open source to my writings, and that's what really made them resonate with the audience, because I wasn't trying to position myself as an expert. I wasn't trying to position myself as a thought leader or any of these other terms. I was just somebody doing the work, taking some risks and chances, experimenting, learning, and sharing. And so I think that message really resonated even at that time, because I think that it was relatable and accessible to other practitioners who were also doing the same things and having the same struggles that I was.
ラース君のブログは専門家同士の知識共有やリアルな体験談を紹介するなどのアプローチで人気になったんだとか。
So what was the typical human resources back then? What was it like back then?
Yeah, I think it was, it's interesting. I think we've come a long way. We've evolved a lot. I think back in that, kind of era of, 2009, we were still largely pretty administrative, pretty reactive in terms of how we support the business. There were exceptions, of course. There's always been exceptions.
Right.
But by and large, I think that's how people perceived the field of HR. I was really fortunate throughout my career to work for some really innovative companies, and more importantly, progressive chief HR officers and chief people officers who didn't see the field in that way. They saw it as a strategic function for the business. They saw it as a role and a function that was able to both champion the organization and the business's needs, but also the employees' needs, and walking that balance. And that's not always easy to do, but I think that they believed in that. And so I was really fortunate to kind of come up early in my career working for a series of leaders like Beverly Carmichael, who is a former chief people officer of Southwest Airlines, and others who really instilled that in me early.
So could you explain the difference between legacy HR and modern HR?
Yeah,
Why are you laughing?
In the book, I think, because I think that it is, that there's such a wide kind of contrast between those two areas. And I think in the book, I use the analogy that, I think a lot of times people refer to HR and they think of HR as like this monolith. Everything everything in HR aligns with their perceptions of what HR is, but their perceptions are only shaped by the companies that they've worked in and the experiences that they've had as an individual with HR. And so I think by and large, HR can tend to get a bad reputation because some of the negative experience or administrative experiences. But the way that I kind of frame this in the book, the way that I think about HR is the field of HR is a spectrum, right? And so if you look on one side, the most progressive side, that's maybe 10% of the field, highly strategic, involved in every business decision, very data driven, very results driven. They can speak metrics of their business and their impact just as much as the CFO or the chief revenue officer. You have the other end of the spectrum, and that's probably twice as big, 20%. That's purely administrative, purely making sure people get paid, handling disciplinary issues, following orders. There's this, we use this term kind of order takers, that certainly fits that bottom 20%. And then 70% is in the middle. And where they sit close to kind of depends on, their experience, their capabilities, the business, the leadership, what they expect from HR. And so when I say, there's a broad range, like that's kind of the differences, I think, between, leading edge HR, and often they refer to themselves as people teams. They don't even use the term HR, and kind of more of the traditional transactional, more administrative oriented kind of legacy, teams of the past.
今までないがしろにされがちだった人事を企業の成長に欠かせない部門にすることがモダン HR の定義なんです。
So, what is like the most ridiculous, outdated HR rule or practice you can think of that we should stop using right at this moment?
Oh boy, wow. Let me think on that for a moment. I want to give you because there's a few that I could choose from.
I bet there's plenty, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I think one that I would say would be annual performance reviews.
Annual
performance reviews, because that frequency doesn't make sense. The world that we're in is evolving too fast. Things change so fast, and I think a lot of companies used annual performance reviews, frankly, as a crutch where, the managers, wouldn't invest the time in their teams to talk about performance and provide coaching and talk about blockers until it's too late, right? If it's the end of the year, all those things have happened. So there may have been incidents in, if you're looking at a calendar year in January and February and March, and if you're not talking about those until December, you failed that employee. And so I think you see companies take more of an approach around, quarterly, even semi-annual, but with more regular check-ins. Like I think performance conversations have to be embedded in the relationship itself between the manager and the employee. It can't just be a retrospective at the end of the year with kind of no discussion or insight or coaching provided until that end period. And so I think that means that it's important to have more of a culture of regular feedback between employees and managers, because otherwise you miss so much over the course of a calendar year if you're not talking about that until the end.
Right. So performance reviews are important is what you're saying, right? It's just that we should make it shorter, right? Like quarterly, yes. Or at least.
Exactly. It's the frequency. So performance reviews are important. I'm not discrediting those, but to wait until a yearly cycle to have a true conversation on performance, right. I think is no longer fit for the times.
So that's like outdated, right?
Yeah.
人事における評価は年次など決まった期間ではなく、頻繁にコミュニケーションをとってその都度評価していくことが今の時代には合っているんだそう。
So in order to rewrite the OS, what is the very first bug that needs to be uninstalled?
Oh, I like that question.
You like that question?
Yeah, look, I think that the first bug that has to be uninstalled is this notion, and it's more of like a legacy HR notion, that HR is there to react to the needs of the business. Legacy HR is going to sit back and wait until they're told what to do or asked what to do, almost as an afterthought in some cases. Whereas modern HR, they're in the rooms where those strategic business conversations are happening, and they have an influential voice in steering what the business will do beyond just the people side, on the strategy side. And so I think that is the first bug that we have to kind of remove from the OS, is this notion that HR is kind of a back office function that just needs to kind of sit back and wait until they're told what to do and then respond to that without actually influencing, steering, and shaping what those decisions are.
Right. Okay. So in your book, you've mentioned many tips and stories to mainly like executives and CEOs. So what perspective should ordinary business person or like new graduates keep in mind when reading your book?
Yeah, I think one of the things that was important to me in writing the book is I was writing from a place of, these are my experiences. Mm-hmm. This is what has worked and what hasn't worked. I wasn't writing from a 40,000 foot level of saying, you have to listen to me, I am the expert, right? I don't really believe in that. And so one of the things that was really important to me in the book was to infuse it with stories of other practitioners who are doing this work and who are sharing their examples of what worked and what didn't. in what they learned. And so I think particular for new graduates getting into the field, I think one of the things that one of the reasons why I think there's never been a better time to be in HR is that in today's world with internet and social media and all these tools that are accessible, you have access to so many big thinkers in the space and practitioners. And so whether you are in Japan or Botswana or South Africa, it is a global environment, and you have the ability to tap into leading practitioners who are sharing their work openly. And they're doing so. The one thing that I would also kind of add to that is a lot of times in the industry, we like to use the term best practice. I think that term, I don't believe in that term, because in my view, a best practice, for something to be a best practice, it has so many org and company and situation and industry and size of growth and global footprint dependencies that allow that practice to work. So I think too often we get, we fall in love with these ideas of a best practice. Well, Google is doing it, or, Coca-Cola is doing it, or, Toyota is doing it. And that's great in that specific company, but it's great because of all of the factors that exist only in that company. And so the way that I reframe that is, don't look at what any of these companies are doing and say, I'm gonna take that, bite by bite, and I'm gonna replicate that exactly. It's not gonna work in your company. But what you should do is you should find multiple examples of that. You can see what you can learn from those examples. You should localize them to your own situation, organization, resources, company, and you should figure out what works for you. And so, I tend to call those proven practices.
Yeah.
大企業が成功したからといって、それが最善の方法ではありません。自分自身の状況などを見極め、そこから証明された実践を導くのが重要なんです。
Lars, what I love about your book is you've mentioned in your book that you've made like many mistakes in your 20 years of career. So is there one mistake that stands out that we can learn something from?
I think the one, this is almost a cheat because it was a mistake, but it ended up working out okay. I think when I was earlier in my career, I ran talent and innovation at National Public Radio. And it was a nonprofit media company in the United States. And I was brought in as the company was evolving from radio and traditional radio and broadcast into digital. And so I was tasked with building out the digital team. And, it was a challenging undertaking. We were a nonprofit. We were very lean in terms of headcount and resources. So we had to get creative with how we thought about recruiting. And so this was in the early days of Twitter, back probably in 2011. And I had an idea for creating a hashtag that we would encourage all employees to use, which now has become a common practice, but I believe this was the first culture hashtag that was created, called NPR Life. And I wanted to basically open that up to all employees to have them share their experience of what it's like to work at that company on Twitter and even Instagram. And I pitched the idea to our head of comms, and we were just in the news for some, reasons. I think, NPR can be a political organization, and there's, one side of the spectrum that I think has wanted to take NPR down for a while. And so there was some unfavorable press about NPR in the news. And so I remember I pitched the idea to our head of communications, and she said, wait a minute, you want to ask all employees to share on social media and use this hashtag? And I was like, yeah. She said, absolutely not. She said, you're so out of touch with the situation we're in right now. We're in the news for all the wrong reasons. We've got to lay low. But I countered that by saying, okay, I understand your concerns. What about instead of rolling this out to the whole company, we just do a small pilot program and we test it and we just see if it lands. And we did, we started testing it. I had a handful of journalists that I was kind of collaborating with who started using it. And about a week into it, one of our hosts of our major shows out of the blue, I didn't know him. He sent out a really funny tweet using the hashtag NPRLife. And at that point, it went viral, and then everybody started using it. So technically, we never released it formally out of the pilot program, but just organically, it grew, and it was incredibly successful. I think, through that and our usage of social media, Twitter became our number 4 source of hire, which is unheard of.
Wow, so it turned out to be a big success.
It did. It was a little rocky getting there. I wasn't sure, but it was a good lesson for me in terms of, when you're trying to get adoption for probably somewhat bold and innovative programs. I encourage all your viewers, use the term pilot.
ラースさんは同僚にも恵まれ、成功を経験することができましたが、社会ではうまくいく人ばかりではありません。中には会社を辞めたいという人も。
Environments that make the talents want to leave the company. Is there like
Yes.
Yeah, there is?
Yeah. Bad bosses.
Bad bosses.
Bad bosses. Yeah.
Totally agree.
When you and the statistics back this up, right? I think most employees leave because of the relationship they have or don't have with their boss. And that's something that again, I think a lot of HR companies invest in is like manager training and like check-ins and making sure that they have, if you're managing people, you know how to manage people and you're supported in being able to manage people. And a lot of companies don't really put enough emphasis on that. They kind of take for granted, hey, well, you were a manager before, so you know how to manage. You'll be a manager here. And that's not always the case. And I think whether it's the most high-performing, company or low-performing company, but if it's a bad boss, it's going to be hard to keep talent. But the inverse is also true. If it's a great boss, and maybe it's not even the best company or the best role or the best growth, but it's a great boss and they invest in their people and their employees feel heard and they feel trusted and they feel empowered and they feel respected. Oftentimes, they will be, I use the term kind of sticky hires. They'll be even stickier. They'll stay longer because of the relationship they have with their manager. And so that kind of cuts both ways.
上司と部下の関係をちゃんと構築する。時代が変わり、アプローチの違いはあれど、今でも大切なことなんですね。ここでキサさん、上司と部下の関係で大ヒットしたドラマに関してラースさんに聞いてみます。
So Lars, let me tell you an interesting story. There was a mega hit. It was a big mega hit Japanese drama called Hanzawa Naoki. It's a drama about a young banker disrupting an old-fashioned organization where employees live in fear of the HR. And in the drama, there is the signature catchphrase, if you screw up with me, I'll get you back double. Okay, that comes out like every episode. So what I wanted to ask you is, so when rewriting the OS of an irrational organization, do we need a rebellious leader like him, or should we take a more conversational, open source approach from a modern HR perspective?
Saying if you cross me, I'm going to get you double, like that's aggressive, it's vindictive. I would say that is not necessarily the approach. But what I would also say is, if you have somebody who is a strong leader, who does believe in open source, who has strong values, stands up for what they believe in, has courage, that person can be just as effective than another person who's trying to rule by fear. Because I think what you're saying, if you mess with me, I'll get you double. That's trying to instill fear in your opposition, right? That's fear-based leadership.
Right.
Whereas I think open source is more of respect and growth-based leadership. And to me, fear-based is more of a, legacy approach, right? That's the tough, grumpy CEO who employees are scared of, and no one wants to tell that person the truth. So they're surrounded by yes people who just validate all their bad decisions and bad opinions. Like, they're doing that leader a disservice, but that leader is created in an environment of fear where people, out of fear or their view of respect are not willing to be honest and real. And I think that's caused a lot of companies' downfalls. I think when you have more of an open approach and you lead by example, and you speak truth to power in a respectful way. It's not just being confrontational, but you're saying, hey, look, no one is telling you this, but everybody feels this, and I'm going to be the one to tell you this. Like, I think ultimately that person is going to be much more valuable to the CEO than all these people who are just saying, oh, yes, that's a great decision, even when they know in their heart it's not, but they're afraid to speak up.
半沢直樹はあくまでもフィクションの世界。でもドラマにもあるようにイエスマンしか周りにいない。高圧的な上司はやはり現実的にもリーダー失格のようです。
So in a future where all HR practices and playbooks are completely open source, what will be the company's unique, irreplaceable strength?
Their culture.
The culture?
You can't open source culture. Their culture, yeah. You can't open source that. You can't open source your, you can open source your values in terms of like.
Wow, I feel great hearing that.
なぜ人事において企業文化が必要なのか。さらに、
ちなみに草さんが以前会社員で働かれてた時は、
はい、
評価はどういう形に評価されてたんですか？
いや、それがね、もう本当にあの頃って一日一日をサバイバルみたいに生きてたので、あんまりそういう組織とか人事とか考えずに生きてたんですけど、今思うと一応アナウンス室の上司がつけてたらしいんですよ。
なるほどなるほど。
草さんの巨漢時代の知られざる人事評価方法とは。次回もラース・シュミットさんに人事について伺います。
最後まで見てくださってありがとうございます。
チャンネル登録、いいねよろしくお願いします。
はい、ピー